December 20th, 1943, the winter sky over northern Germany carried the dull metallic glow of a world at war. Engines roared above the cold landscape as waves of American B-17 bombers pushed toward their target. Aircraft factories around Bremen, each one a flying fortress designed to take punishment and still return home. But on this particular morning, one bomber would be forced into a fight, not merely for survival, but for the very definition of humanity in a war determined to erase it. That bomber was a B-17F, known as Ye Olde Pub, crewed by 10 men and commanded by 21-year-old pilot Charlie Brown. It was Brown's first mission as lead pilot, a distinction few rookies ever desired. Missions over Germany were unforgiving, often described by veterans as stepping into a steel storm. Bomber formations were built on tight precision and mutual protection, fall out of formation, even for seconds, and the enemy would swarm like hawks spotting a wounded bird. That morning, the steel storm hit early. German fighters rose from the ground in waves, experienced pilots flying nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. They tore into the American formation with textbook precision. Ye Olde Pub, positioned in the formation where the fire was often heaviest, suffered the kind of punishment that usually ended in a falling ball of flame. Cannon rounds smashed into the fuselage. One engine was obliterated outright, another was crippled and leaking oil. The electrical system flickered in and out. The oxygen lines, essential for survival at altitude, were punctured, causing the crew to slip in and out of consciousness as hypoxia set in. Shattered plexiglass from the nose allowed frozen air to rip through the bomber's interior. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, was killed instantly. Others were bleeding heavily, struggling to do jobs that required both strength and clarity they no longer had. Despite this, Brown held the controls with a steadiness that belied his age. With their bombs dropped, he tried to guide the bomber back toward England, but the wounds the aircraft sustained had forced Ye Olde Pub out of formation, the worst possible fate. Alone, low, and slow, the bomber was a limping giant just waiting for predators to spot it. Those predators arrived in the form of a Messerschmitt Bf 109, sleek, sharp, and deadly, piloted by a man whose experience far outmatched the young American at the controls of the dying bomber. His name was Franz Stigler. Born in Bavaria in 1915 to a family woven into the legacy of early aviation, Stigler grew up with engines and canvas wings in his blood. His father and uncle had flown in the First World War, and by the time the second global conflict ignited Europe, Franz had already logged thousands of hours as a civilian pilot and instructor. He had trained under some of Germany's most respected aces, including the famed Gustav Rodel, a man who taught him that honor in the air was not optional, it was essential. You fight by rules, Rodel had once told him, to protect your own humanity. By late 1943, Stigler was no novice. He had flown in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, survived multiple shoot-downs, and accumulated an impressive 22 confirmed kills. He was the kind of pilot Germany desperately needed as Allied air raids increased in both frequency and ferocity. And on that December morning, he had just refueled his fighter at Jever Airfield after an earlier engagement when ground crew spotted the American bomber limping past the airfield at astonishingly low altitude. To any German fighter pilot, this sight meant one thing: an easy kill. A crippled bomber flying low and out of formation was the equivalent of a wounded animal trying to outrun a pack of wolves. Stigler climbed back into the cockpit, his Messerschmitt roaring to life as he prepared to intercept. His mind was clear. One more confirmed kill would earn him the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest honors, a symbol of valor that pilots sought with fierce pride. As he closed in on the bomber, he prepared for the final attack pass. Standard procedure was simple: identify, choose your angle, fire, and move on. But this time, something unexpected stopped him before he pulled the trigger. Through the massive, jagged holes carved into the fuselage, Franz Stigler could see inside the B-17 as if he were looking into a torn-open machine bleeding its last strength. He saw dead and wounded crew members slumped at their posts. He saw the tail section nearly severed from the rest of the aircraft, still somehow clinging on. He saw guns shattered, ammunition nearly gone, and men who couldn't possibly defend themselves. And in the cockpit, amid the chaotic damage, Charlie Brown locked eyes with him. In that split second, an instant stretched thin by the cruelty of war, Stigler felt Rodell's words echo through him. Shooting down this bomber would not be combat. It would be execution. A principle of honor existed among pilots going back to the earliest days of air combat. You did not kill a man who could no longer defend himself. It was the same reason you never shot a parachuting pilot. These Americans, wounded and barely airborne, were no different. Stigler eased his finger off the trigger. Instead of firing, he pulled the Messerschmitt alongside the bomber, wingtip to wingtip. Inside Ye Olde Pub, panic surged. The crew expected to be finished at any second. Some tried to man the battered guns out of pure desperation, but the weapons no longer had the ability or the ammunition to fight back. Stigler didn't fire. He gestured downward, signaling that they should land and surrender. Brown refused, understanding that surrender would mean imprisonment and uncertain fate. The bomber continued toward the North Sea, clinging to life with every sputtering rotation of its damaged engines. Stigler stayed with them. What he did next was not simply unexpected, it was a direct violation of German military law. He positioned his fighter beside the bomber in a protective formation, visible to German anti-aircraft gunners on the ground. Any Allied plane normally would have been ripped apart by flak, but a German fighter escorting it created uncertainty. Gunners hesitated. They held their fire. Stigler was shielding his enemy from his own side. They flew together, one aircraft whole, the other barely recognizable as a functioning machine, crossing the German coastline and reaching the cold expanse of the North Sea. Stigler knew he had gone as far as he could without risking discovery. If anyone reported what he had done, he could be court-martialed and executed. Still, he stayed with them just long enough to know they had a chance. At the final moment, he pulled in close once more, raised his hand, and delivered a crisp military salute, pilot to pilot, soldier to soldier, human being to human being. Then he turned away, letting the bomber continue toward England as he disappeared back into the gray German sky. Ye Olde Pub somehow remained airborne long enough to reach the British coast, landing in a condition that stunned ground crews. The bomber was so mutilated it was immediately scrapped. It would never fly again. But the crew survived. All of them who lived through the attack made it home, and none of them understood why the German pilot had spared them. They would carry that question for decades. When Ye Olde Pub came to its final grinding stop on the British airfield, emergency crews rushed toward it, expecting only bodies. The fuselage looked as if it had been chewed apart by some mechanical monster, holes big enough for a man to climb through, shredded metal curling like torn paper, and engines barely clinging to their mounts. The astonishment on the faces of ground personnel said everything. This aircraft should have fallen from the sky long before reaching England. Yet as medics pulled the wounded crew from the wreck, a question pulsed beneath the chaos. Unspoken, but shared by every man who survived that flight. Why had the German fighter refused to finish them? The idea that an enemy pilot would risk his own position, possibly his life, to spare them, made little sense in the brutal logic of total war. And so Charlie Brown made a decision. He told his crew to keep silent. He understood how the story might sound to military officials. Doubt would cloud it, and questions would follow. Had the crew failed to fire? Had there been some unspoken arrangement? Had they simply imagined mercy in the adrenaline-drenched aftermath of battle? Better, he thought, to keep the memory private. Back in Germany, Franz Stigler returned to his base alone and landed without fanfare. He made no report. He offered no explanation for the ammunition still in his guns or the missing kill he was expected to claim. He simply carried on as if nothing had occurred. He understood the gravity of what he had done. In the German military code, sparing a defenseless enemy was not viewed as mercy. It was viewed as aiding the other side. And aiding the enemy was treason. Many pilots had been executed for far less, so Stigler sealed away the memory. If anyone knew he had deliberately escorted a crippled bomber to safety, the consequences would be instantaneous. In the years that followed, he continued to fly combat missions, fighting with unquestionable skill, even as the Luftwaffe slowly buckled under the increasing might of Allied air power. He survived the war and surrendered to American forces, eventually making his way to Canada in 1953 to rebuild a life far removed from the battlegrounds that had shaped him. Though the war ended, the moment over the North Sea lingered in both men in different ways. For Charlie Brown, the image of the German pilot's salute would return whenever he thought about survival, fate, or the thin line between life and death. For Franz Stigler, the memory carried a different weight. He often reflected not on the bomber he spared, but on all the airmen, Allied and German, he had watched fall through burning skies. His act of mercy on that December day had become a personal anchor, a reminder that in the chaos of war he had chosen a path that allowed him to look back on his service without shame. For more than 4 decades, the moment remained nothing more than a scar carried privately by each man, tender, unforgettable, but sealed away. Then, in 1986, Charlie Brown decided he could no longer leave the question unanswered. He wanted to know whether the German pilot who spared them had survived the war, whether he had been punished for his mercy, whether he even remembered the encounter. And perhaps above all, Charlie wanted to thank him. Finding one man among the thousands who had served in the Luftwaffe seemed nearly impossible. The German Air Force's wartime records were scattered, destroyed, or stored deep within archives not easily accessible. But Brown had a resource few others had, the Brotherhood of Wartime Aviators. He prepared a written account describing the encounter, careful, detailed, and measured, and sent it to a Combat Pilot Association newsletter, asking if anyone knew of a German fighter pilot who had spared a B-17 near the North Sea on December 20th, 1943. Months passed. Then, one day, an unexpected letter arrived. Franz Stigler, now living quietly in Canada, had read the story. He recognized the date, he recognized the bomber's condition, and he recognized the silence because he had kept it too. Stigler wrote back, confirming what Brown had hoped, yet scarcely allowed himself to believe. And in 1990, nearly half a century after their lives had intersected for the briefest of moments, the two men met face to face in a gathering hall in Seattle. They recognized each other instantly. For Brown, seeing Stigler in person was like glimpsing the ghost of a moment he had preserved in memory, the same steady eyes, the same calm composure. For Stigler, Brown was no longer the shaken young pilot clinging to life in a dying aircraft, but a dignified man whose gratitude radiated through every word. They spoke for hours. Stigler explained that he had carried guilt for decades, not for sparing ye old pub, but for the countless American and British airmen he had shot down during the war. Brown shared the weight he had carried, the secrecy, the disbelief he feared, and the lasting respect that one act of mercy had etched into him. What began that afternoon blossomed into a profound friendship. They attended reunions together, visited air shows, and recounted the story to audiences who listened with disbelief until the conclusion revealed the magnitude of what had transpired between them. Their relationship deepened not because they shared the same side of history, but because they had transcended it. The war had made them enemies. Honor had made them brothers. In their later years, they spoke on the phone almost every week. They visited one another's families. They built a friendship rooted in a shared understanding that the world had once demanded they kill each other. And yet, through an extraordinary choice, they had been granted a second chance at life, one that allowed them to redefine the meaning of duty and humanity. Franz Stigler passed away in March 2008 at the age of 92. Charlie Brown died just months later at 87. Their graves lie not far apart, an unintentional final testament to the bond forged in the sky over Germany more than 6 decades earlier. Their story endures because it illuminates a truth often hidden beneath the machinery and brutality of war. Even when nations command violence, individuals can still choose compassion. Stigler gained no medals, no promotions, no recognition from his own military for sparing Brown's crew. What he gained instead was his humanity preserved, his sense that, even in the darkest moments, honor could survive. And for Charlie Brown and the men of Ye Olde Pub, that humanity was the difference between life and death. In the vast chronicles of World War II, filled with destruction, strategy, and statistics, the encounter between Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown remains one of the rare examples where an act of mercy cut through the machinery of conflict and left behind a story not of victory, but of character. One that proved that even in total war, the human spirit could still choose what was right. Long before Franz Stigler pulled his fighter alongside Charlie Brown's crippled B-17, a unique ethos had already taken shape in the world of military aviation, an unwritten code woven from decades of aerial combat, beginning as early as World War I. Pilots in the Great War fought in open cockpits, often close enough to see one another's faces, and the intimacy of that form of battle shaped a legacy that carried into the next generation. Many pilots came to believe that courage and skill mattered as much as victory. And for them, the sky was not just a battleground, but a stage where personal character was tested in ways the ground war could never replicate. This culture of respect did not stop the killing, nothing ever could, but it did create an environment where acts of mercy, however rare, were still possible. In World War II, that old world chivalry lingered, though strained by the massive scale and industrial brutality of the conflict. Most fighter pilots were still young men with thousands of hours in training, many drawn to the romance and challenge of flight, rather than the ideological battles politicians waged from behind desks. They experienced war differently than infantry. Their enemy was often a distant silhouette just long enough to squeeze the trigger. Yet, even in the chaos of dogfights, countless pilots on both sides acknowledged a strange bond, an understanding that the man in the other cockpit endured the same fear, the same split-second decisions, the same dance with death. The rivalry was fierce, but personal animosity was often absent. Pilots rarely hated each other. They respected the skill required to survive. This sense of airborne honor did not exist everywhere, nor did it dictate the behavior of every aviator. Strategic bombing, targeting cities, factories, and infrastructure, blurred ethical lines and left civilian populations exposed to devastation. Fighters were sometimes ordered to shoot parachuting pilots, though many refused. Others were required to finish off damaged aircraft regardless of their condition. Decisions varied across units, individuals, and circumstances, and yet through all these contradictions, something persisted. A belief among many aviators that certain acts were beneath them, even if war demanded brutality. Franz Stigler's upbringing played a crucial role in shaping his view of combat. His mentor, Gustav Rodel, was widely respected not just as an ace, but as a moral compass within the Luftwaffe fighter arm. Rodel believed that a pilot's honor was worth more than medals, and he told his students that their humanity must survive the war, even if they did not. This philosophy was not officially sanctioned by the Nazi regime, far from it. It was a personal code held by a number of seasoned pilots who had seen enough of war to understand that cruelty had no end unless individuals chose to limit it. On the Allied side, similar values appeared in the recollections of American, British, and Commonwealth pilots. Many described encounters where the enemy, upon seeing a crippled fighter or bomber, simply banked away, choosing to let gravity or weather finish the job rather than firing the final rounds. Veteran bomber crews spoke of German or Italian fighters who sometimes pulled alongside a damaged aircraft not to kill, but to confirm the condition of the crew. Most of these moments went unrecorded, brief flashes of humanity swallowed by the enormity of the war. Such acts did not make the war any less deadly. The skies over Europe remained among the most dangerous places in the world. Daylight raids by American bombers resulted in staggering casualty rates. Before the introduction of long-range fighter escorts, B-17 and B-24 crews sometimes faced survival odds comparable to infantry charging entrenched positions. Fighter pilots, too, lived on borrowed time. The average life expectancy for a new pilot in many Luftwaffe units during late war operations was measured in weeks, sometimes days. The courage required to climb into a cockpit each morning was immense, and many men, on both sides, fought primarily for the comrades they trained with, rather than any distant political ideal. In this context, the story of Stigler and Brown transcends simple categories of heroism. It was more than an unusual encounter. It was a moment that exposed the conflict between individual morality and the machinery of war. Stigler was expected to serve a regime that demanded total obedience, yet he listened instead to the compass set by his mentor. Brown was trained to see German fighters as deadly threats, yet the man who could have ended his life became the reason he lived to old age. When the two finally met decades later, the embrace they shared symbolized more than gratitude. It showed that the humanity suppressed by war can still emerge years afterward, reshaping the memory of a conflict long after the weapons have gone silent. Their friendship offered a living rebuttal to the idea that wartime enemies must forever remain adversaries. Both men, in interviews later in life, spoke not of the politics of the war, but of the people they lost, fellow pilots who never returned, friends who vanished into smoke or sea, lives measured by bursts of gunfire and fate. The bond they forged became a testament to the notion that the deepest connections sometimes arise from the most unlikely circumstances. By saving Brown's crew, Stigler had unknowingly created a future in which the men could honor one another not as combatants, but as human beings who shared an extraordinary moment in history. Today, historians view their story as one of the clearest examples of chivalry surviving into the modern age of mechanized war. Museums and memorials preserve their letters, photographs, and accounts not because the event changed the tide of conflict, but because it revealed something profound and enduring about the choices individuals can make, even when caught inside forces beyond their control. The story is used in military academies to illustrate ethical decision-making under pressure, and it continues to resonate with pilots who understand the razor-thin margin separating victory from tragedy. In the end, the legacy of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown is not about a single act of mercy. It is about the enduring power of conscience in a world designed to suppress it. It is about the belief that honor matters even when no one is watching. And it is about the human capacity to see beyond uniforms, flags, and orders, recognizing instead the shared vulnerability that binds all people, even those who meet as enemies, in the violent skies of war. Their encounter reminds future generations that war may compel men to fight, but it cannot erase their ability to choose compassion when it matters most.